At 78 years old, Steven Tyler stood on a stage in Long Island, New York, and felt something inside him break that would never be repaired. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally, physically. A fracture so complete that the world's most famous voice became, overnight, something he could no longer recognize as his own. But that's not where this story begins. That's where it ends. The tragedy of a legend isn't always found in the moments people watch. Sometimes it's found in the moments they miss, the quiet surrenders that no spotlight illuminates, the futures that close without applause. Steven Tyler's entire life has been a conversation between sound and silence, between the roar that made him immortal and the quiet that he could never escape. And on September 10th, 2023, at 75 years old, his body finally made a choice that his mind had been resisting for decades. It chose silence. When you think of Steven Tyler, what comes to mind? The scarves flying around the microphone stand? The voice that Rolling Stone ranked among the greatest 100 singers of all time? The demon of screaming, a name he earned not through cruelty, but through the sheer unbridled ferocity of his vocal cords, attacking every song like it was the last song he would ever sing. 4 Grammy Awards, over 150 million records sold, a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Aerosmith, the band that shouldn't have survived, shouldn't have come back, shouldn't have become legendary. But they did. He did. That's what the world knows. What the world doesn't know is what happens to a man when the one thing that defined his entire existence is taken away not by choice, but by the body's final vote of no confidence. Steven Victor Tallarico entered the world on March 26, 1948, into a family where music wasn't a career, it was oxygen. His father, Victor Alones Tallico, had walked those hallowed halls at Juilliard. He had won a gold medal at Carnegie Hall in 1937. He had played alongside giants, Ella Fitzgerald, Oscar Peterson, names that echoed through classical concert halls like prayers. His mother, Susan Ray Blanchard, came from a family of musicians. His grandfather played cello. 3 generations of virtuosos had created this child before he even learned to speak. In the Tallarico household, there was no question about what Steven would become. The only question was how he would become it. His father wanted classical, discipline, structure, the kind of music that required precision, so exacting that one wrong note could unravel years of practice. Victor remembered his father telling him, "Steven, you can play rock and roll on the weekends, but get a decent job." It was meant as guidance. It landed as a prophecy of everything they would never share. But Steven didn't hear Chopin. He heard something in the air of the 1960s, something wild and uncontainable. He heard the Rolling Stones screaming from transistor radios. He heard the hunger in rock music, the desperation, the refusal to be civilized. At 17, he went to Greenwich Village and saw Mick Jagger on stage, and something crystallized inside him. Not the music, the permission. The permission to be exactly as loud as you needed to be. The permission to turn chaos into art. By 19, he was screaming into a microphone in small clubs and college auditoriums. By 20, he was forming bands with names like Chain Reaction, opening for established groups, learning the architecture of how to make a crowd feel like their hearts were being held in his hands. But it was the loneliness that truly shaped him. School expelled him for marijuana use. He didn't fit anywhere except on stage. And on stage, for the first time in his life, his difference wasn't a flaw. It was his superpower. In the summer of 1969, in a small New Hampshire resort town, a 21-year-old Steven Tyler saw Joe Perry playing guitar in a cover band, washing dishes for a living. Perry had what Tyler called real fire, the kind that didn't need teaching and couldn't be put out. By October 1970, they had moved into an apartment at 1325 Commonwealth Avenue in Boston with 2 other musicians. They were broke, living on ramen, rehearsing in a basement, sometimes stopping rehearsal at 4:30 p.m. to watch the Three Stooges on television. Their first album barely charted. Their first single, Dream On, a song Tyler had written as a teenager about the fragility of dreams, peaked at number 59. Radio programmers across America weren't listening, but Boston was. Boston heard it. Boston believed. Then something shifted. Between 1975 and 1976, Aerosmith didn't just become successful. They became inevitable. Toys in the Attic sold over 10 million copies. Rock sold over 5 million. The band that played small clubs was now headlining stadiums. And the voice, that extraordinary, impossible voice, became the most recognizable sound in rock and roll. Steven Tyler didn't just sing. He transformed. He jumped. He spun. He wrapped scars around the microphone stand and turned them into weapons of beauty. He screamed with a texture so distinctive that even a single note could fill 80,000 people with electricity. But parallel to every rung of glory was a heavier drug dose than the last. Heroin, cocaine, alcohol. The combination was called the Toxic Twins when paired with Joe Perry's equally voracious appetite for self-destruction. The press called it legendary. The press didn't see the chairs flying in dressing rooms. The press didn't see the men tearing each other apart. The press only saw the music, and the music was the most brilliant thing rock had ever made. Steven believed drugs were the fuel of creativity. He believed he needed heroin to write songs and cocaine to perform them. This belief would cost him the 1980s. It would nearly kill him. It would take losing everything, his voice, his clarity, his band, before he understood that the belief itself was the addiction. In 1984, Steven Tyler entered rehab for the first time. He was furious. He didn't understand why he was there. In 1986, he returned. Still didn't understand. There was no such thing as a rehab center back then, he would later say. Just psychiatric hospitals. The early 80s were horrible. But in 1988, something changed. Not because Tyler wanted it. Because everyone he loved forced it. The band's management and members staged an intervention. They dragged him into rehab a third time. And this time, he was more than furious. He was devastated. He felt abandoned. He felt betrayed. I got sober, and it took me years to stop being angry about being pushed into rehab while they went on vacation. But something happened in that silence. For the first time in his adult life, Steven Tyler existed without a stage, without cocaine, without heroin, without any noise to cover what was inside. And in that terrible, beautiful silence, he discovered something impossible. He could write better music sober. He could sing stronger sober. He could create more sharply sober. The belief that had held him prisoner for 15 years, that drugs were the price of genius, was shattered by the very music he created after rehab. Permanent Vacation sold over 7 million copies. Pump pushed Aerosmith to heights they'd never reached even at their 70s peak. Janie's Got a Gun, a song about child abuse, brought Aerosmith their first Grammy in 1990. The band everyone had written an obituary for came back stronger. The man everyone had written off as a casualty of excess proved that sobriety wasn't the death of creativity, it was the birth of it. The 1990s belonged to Aerosmith. MTV played their videos constantly. Janie's Got a Gun, Amazing, Crazy became cultural touchstones. Tyler transformed again, no longer just a rock singer, but a television star, a cultural icon, a man both men and women wanted to be or be with. In 1998, Aerosmith recorded I Don't Want to Miss a Thing for the blockbuster film Armageddon. The song was about a father saying goodbye to his daughter. In the film, his real daughter, Liv Tyler, the child he'd been absent from for the first 11 years of her life, played the daughter saying goodbye to her father. Tyler stood at the microphone and sang the words that would become the biggest hit of his entire career. I Don't Want to Miss a Thing. The song held number 1 for 4 consecutive weeks. The whole world heard it as a love ballad, but it was something else entirely. It was an apology, a promise, a confession of 11 years missed, 11 birthdays absent, 11 years his daughter called another man dad. By 2001, Aerosmith was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 50 years of music, 150 million records. From a cramped Boston apartment to the most sacred temple in rock history. He had survived addiction. He had survived his own destruction. He had proven that a man could be broken and still be saved. But the body keeps its own record of everything. After the foot surgery in 2003 for a chronic condition, doctors prescribed opioid painkillers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew his history. This time, addiction didn't wear the face of rock and roll excess. It wore the white coat of medicine, the prescription pad of legitimacy, the label of a plastic bottle signed by a doctor. In 2006, he publicly revealed he'd been living with hepatitis C, a legacy of needle use from the 1970s. 11 months of chemotherapy. It nearly killed him. That same year, his marriage to Teresa Barrick ended. His second divorce. His second failure at Forever. In 2009, at an outdoor concert in Sturgis, South Dakota, Tyler slipped and fell off the stage during Love in an elevator. Broken shoulder, 20 stitches on his head. The injury required pain medication. The pain medication required higher doses. The higher doses required even more. The spiral returned with cruel precision. He entered Betty Ford in December 2009. This time, he understood something he hadn't in 1988. Sobriety wasn't a one-time victory. It was a daily battle for the rest of his life. But the body kept speaking. In 2011, he fell in a hotel bathroom in Paraguay, breaking teeth, requiring stitches. In 2022, another foot surgery. Again the opioids. Again the relapse. Again the rehab. 4 rehab stints. 4 times. Each one a failure and a victory. Each one proof that recovery wasn't about reaching a finish line. It was about running the same race every single day for the rest of your life. By 2023, Aerosmith had announced Peace Out, a farewell tour. 50 shows across North America. A final goodbye to over 50 years of performing. Tickets sold like the world was ending because for fans, in a way, it was. The first 3 shows went smoothly. Then came September 10th, 2023. A stage in Long Island, New York. 75-year-old Steven Tyler was performing when his voice began to break. Not the kind of break any singer experiences after several consecutive nights of performing. Not fatigue, not strain. Something structural, something broken. His larynx had fractured, literally. In the middle of the show, his instrument, the instrument that had defined his entire existence, that had traveled the world, that had made millions weep, shattered. He wrote to fans immediately. I'm heartbroken to say that I received strict doctor's orders not to sing for the next 30 days. I have broken blood vessels in my vocal cords. But the reality was far more severe. Laryngeal fracture, vocal cord damage, medical confirmation that what had broken couldn't simply be repaired. After age 30, the laryngeal cartilage gradually ossifies, becoming brittle and more prone to fracture under impact. For Steven Tyler, who had been screaming professionally for 59 years, since 1964 when he first picked up a microphone with Chain Reaction, his larynx had endured pressure no human voice was designed to withstand for such a duration. This wasn't an accident. This was the inevitable consequence of a lifetime of screaming. The final bill his body sent after half a century. And finally, it refused to extend credit. The following months were the quietest in Steven Tyler's life. He spent time trying to recover his voice. The best medical team, every treatment, every method, but his body had made its decision. For the first time, he was forced to be silent. Not by choice, not by rehab, by compulsion, by his own body forbidding him from producing sound. The man defined by noise was stripped of the right to create it. The microphone was still there. The scarves still hung on the mic stand. But no one was singing. The farewell tour was postponed to 2024. Fans waited with fragile hope. Then on August 2nd, 2024, Aerosmith issued a statement. Steven's voice is an instrument like no other. He has spent many months tirelessly working to get his voice back to where it was before the injury. Sadly, it is clear that a full recovery from the vocal injury is not possible. We have made the painful and difficult but necessary decision to retire from the touring stage. 54 years, 15 studio albums, over 150 million records sold. One sentence: a full recovery is not possible. Joe Perry, the remaining toxic twin who had been with Tyler since 1969, told Boston Radio, "I have spent a lot of time with Steven, and he simply doesn't want to tour and can't tour. It's hard." 12 words. No rhetoric. No drama. Just one man talking about his brother who had lost the most precious thing the two had ever shared. At 78, Steven Tyler carries marks of everything he has lived through. His hair is still long, but thinner. His face is carved by 50 years of rock and roll, addiction, hepatitis C, chemotherapy for rehabs, 2 divorces, and a broken larynx. His body can no longer jump like those nights at Madison Square Garden or Budokan, but he doesn't hide it. He doesn't try to look younger. He wears those years like another stage costume, openly, unapologetically, without explanation. In February 2025, 6 months after retirement, Tyler stepped onto a stage at the Hollywood Palladium during a Grammy Awards viewing party. He sang More Than Words with Mick Fleetwood. He performed Toys in the Attic and Dream On, the song he wrote as a teenager in Yonkers more than half a century earlier. His voice was different, smaller, thinner, more fragile. No longer the sky-tearing scream that earned him the nickname, the Demon of Screaming. But it was still his voice, and the audience wasn't there for perfect vocal technique. They were there because they wanted to be near the man who had given them 50 years of their lives, and to hear him sing with whatever was left. The final paradox: the demon of screaming can no longer scream. The broken larynx silenced the voice that once shook stadiums on 6 continents. The farewell tour was canceled. The retirement was announced. But he refused to disappear. Joe Perry said something that fans clung to like a final thread. "I bet there's one more Aerosmith show. There are talks about doing a documentary. Maybe we'll be part of that. Not a tour, not 40 nights, just one moment." A door cracked open just enough for the light to come through. At 78 years old, Steven Tyler exists in a space few legends have ever had to learn to inhabit. The gap between who he once was and who he was forced to become. The space between sound and silence. Between the stage and the life after it. The voice is broken. The touring is over. The stage is dark. But somewhere inside, the 78-year-old man with the fractured larynx, the boy from Yonkers who first opened his mouth on a club stage and felt the world finally listen, is still there. Steven Tyler didn't lose his voice suddenly. He lost it gradually, through 50 years of screaming his soul into microphones, through decades of asking his body to do the impossible, through a lifetime of making noise so that others wouldn't have to sit in silence alone. The scream began in 1964 when a teenager first discovered that his difference was his power. The scream ended in 2023 when his body finally said, "That's enough." But what remains isn't the sound. What remains is what the sound left behind. A feeling that can't be unmade, a memory that can't be erased, a connection that doesn't need volume to exist. The microphone is still in his hand. The scarves still hang on a mic stand. But this time, the silence isn't defeat. It's a different kind of testimony. It's the sound of a man who gave everything, survived everything, and stood there anyway. When you think of Steven Tyler, what comes first now? The screams? The scarves? The music? Or the man who survived heroin, cocaine, hepatitis C, for rehabs, 2 divorces, and a body that finally said no? Steven Tyler is not a perfect rock god or a tragic cautionary tale. He is both at the same time in the same person. And it is precisely the inseparability of those 2 extremes that is his true legacy. The man who once received standing ovations from 80,000 people is also the man who once sat in a rehab room shaking, starting over from zero. The greatest voice of his generation is also the voice permanently silenced by his own body at 75. There is no neat resolution to this story. There are no simple conclusions. But there are things that do not depend on court verdicts or public opinion or chart positions. Steven Tyler changed rock and roll permanently. He proved that a band could die and come back stronger. He proved that rock could meet hip-hop and both could grow. He proved that a rock star could be sober and still be great. In an era of music increasingly mechanized and edited through software and algorithms, Tyler reminds us that rock and roll is first and last about raw, unprocessed human emotion. The broken larynx has silenced the voice that once shook stadiums on 6 continents. But the scream was never just about volume. It was about a boy in Yonkers, expelled from Roosevelt High School, belonging nowhere except under stage lights, discovering that if he screamed loud enough, the world would stop and listen. The world listened for 50 years. And now, in the silence that follows, what remains is not the sound, but the feeling that sound left behind. Tyler stands on stage at 78, the microphone in his hand, the scars still hanging on the mic stand, but silent, no screaming, just standing there. And that presence, wordless, musicless, screamless, is still enough to fill the room. That's what happened to Steven Tyler at 78. He learned how to be heard without making sound. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share it. Because sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that knows when to stop screaming and simply stand.